What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions of Atomfall. A game that's a little difficult to describe, honestly, in terms of genre, but I'd probably coin it as an action-adventure with some survival elements myself. But in any event, I'm bringing you this first impressions video a few days before the game launches, and in fact a few days before its early access period for the deluxe edition begins. I'm able to do that because I was provided a review copy recently. Now, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of the legacy media sites have already posted their reviews, and it looks like they sent out at least some review keys for content creators like myself a little bit later. I got it yesterday, as a matter of fact. But what's more, that review key for PC at least was only available on the Xbox app for PC, so I'm not able to go through Steam like I normally do, and a little bit more on that at the end. But for right now, let's actually talk about Atomfall. So first impressions wise, I will say that this game is definitely a little bit different for sure. On one hand, I wouldn't say combat is especially over the top or anything, but it has a certain methodical pace to it that is largely defined by how much you prepared for it, as an example, and then getting to the bottom of the mysteries that see you stuck here in this little quarantine zone is definitely mysterious at the very least. But the gist of it, or the premise for those unaware, is that the game takes place in a quarantine zone, as you'd imagine, but the quarantine has been caused by an alternative history version of a real-life world event, which I believe was known as the Windscale incident or something like that. It was a nuclear disaster that happened in Britain. They're using that as the premise for this story, which is obviously that something more nefarious was going on here, rather than just a, run-of-the-mill nuclear incident. Which is especially strange for us because our character, who we don't really define in any way, you just kind of get thrown into the game, wakes up in a bunker being questioned by a scientist. We have no idea how we got here. We have no idea what's going on, and we quickly have to get to grips with everything. Shortly after escaping this bunker by getting the key card from the scientist, we are contacted via telephone and sort of pushed towards our main objective, which is discovering this facility here and getting to the bottom of what was going on there. Now, that's about as much as I want to say story-wise for the sake of spoilers, obviously, but probably right away the big thing to mention in terms of the story is that it's very free-form and determined by you, the player, in the sense that you can kind of do it in whatever order or however you would like to. You can kill everyone, you can cooperate with the game's various factions, you can get to the bottom of mysteries, solve quests in a variety of different ways, which I've already experienced some of myself. For instance, one of the first places you go is called Wyndham Village, and there was a main story quest there that I needed to get done that had multiple paths and conclusions just so I could get my hands on an item at the end of it, and I thought that was pretty neat. And I think if the entire story manages to be exactly that, it'll be especially interesting. But then there's also that sort of science fiction aspect of it. For instance, relatively quickly after I was just kind of thrown into the world and exploring a little bit, I ran into these things called ferals, which seem to be corrupted human beings of some sort that have in fact gone feral, caused by whatever is going on here. So story-wise, I'm very interested. I'm curious to see if they can actually pull this off over the course of the entire title, because right here at the beginning, I'm pretty invested. Now, I mentioned that there wasn't much of a character creation or anything like that, and the reason for that is our character is largely undefined, but there is a little bit of progression. So as we're exploring, we can find both manuals and training serums. So manuals will unlock skills for us to then actually unlock and use via training serums. So you have to find the manual and the serum. And then doing that will unlock various perks and things, making us better at, melee combat, ranged combat with weapons and the like. And then the other part of progression is, of course, just gearing up and getting items under your belt as we start with basically nothing. But when it comes to actually exploring the world, it seems to be divided up into several sort of interconnected hubs, each with their own thing going on. For instance, the area that we kind of get thrown into at the beginning is full of outlaws or bandits, essentially. And then there's the actual village, which is controlled by a faction known as Protocol. And then there's a couple other areas as well I haven't quite gotten to yet that I believe are controlled by a cult at the very least. And you're supposed to be able to interact with these factions in various ways. You don't necessarily need to fight everything. For instance, if you're not in a place that is strictly trespassing, it's possible to say just point your gun at enemies if you have one to get them to back off a little bit, and they won't typically engage in combat right away unless you get super up close to them. So you've got a little bit of wiggle room in terms of choosing to engage with these guys outside of things like the ferals, which are obviously much more aggressive. Now, outside of those faction interactions in terms of what the story brings, it's also a pretty densely packed place. There seems to be a lot of stuff just around. For instance, you get a metal detector, which will let you dig up caches as well. It's possible to find like recipes and things, which will help you craft, which kind of leans into that survival crafting element. There doesn't seem to be anything like hunger or water meters, but even then, if any of that is a bother for you, there is a pretty modular difficulty, several presets, and then you can actually go in and adjust those presets on a much more granular level. So difficulty-wise, I think this will be pretty much whatever you want it to be. But I would say the sort of expense of that is that at least here in the early game, combat seems very basic. It's pretty much melee or guns, and none of them are like really stellar individual systems. Now, I would say this is a game that's more about the systems that surround combat rather than the combat itself, so that's not necessarily a deal breaker for me, but I do think if you're looking for like stellar combat to go with some of the stalking, especially around the ferals, it's probably not going to be for you. Which brings me to the sort of end of this first impressions, at least in terms of what I've experienced here so far. To me, it seems like Atomfall is serving up a very specific experience. One that I believe Rebellion themselves, the developer, described as a little experimental. And I would say already that this seems like the type of thing that's probably not going to be for everybody, but the people that like it are really going to like it. But what is most interesting to me specifically is how they handle the story and the narrative here, as that's what I'm enjoying the most, alongside some of the initial exploration that goes into seeing how a lot of this stuff weaves together. So when you put all of that together, I would say so far at least Atomfall seems, again, like a super specific experience, and I'm curious, for myself at least, over the course of what will ultimately be my review for that, if it A, manages to stay interesting, and B, throw any curveballs at me. But I think that's a good place to wrap up an impressions video. Now, normally I like to give a little bit of a timeline here at the end so I can kind of let people know when to expect the review for this, but that's a little bit complicated for this one because straight away I want to finish Rise of the Ronin, which recently came to PC, and I'm most of the way through at this point, more than half anyway. Especially since reviews for this game are already out, so the embargo has passed. But the thing about being on the Xbox app for PC is it actually makes my 100% reviews a little more difficult in the sense that pre-release I can't actually see the achievements on the Xbox app the way I can on Steam. So when you get a pre-release copy of a game on Steam, you can still see the achievements and everything and just look them up and go get them. I don't normally use the Xbox app on PC, and it doesn't seem like it's going to let me look at the achievements for Atomfall before it actually releases. Now, I think that might sort itself out when the game enters its early access period on, I believe it's like the 24th, so it might wind up being a non-issue on my end, and I'll just be able to show people the Xbox achievements, I suppose. But either way, that's kind of another reason I'm putting it off a little bit, because I would like to actually 100% this thing, and that's the kind of thing that's made easier when you actually know what you need to do. But basically because of that, I have no idea on the exact timeline for the review for Atomfall, but it will get done, hopefully as close to its launch date as possible, so I can jump from this into the first Berserker Kazan, as it's a bit of a busy moment here at the end of March. One way or the other though, I'll get it all sorted out, which is where we're going to end this video. So hopefully you enjoyed all that. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Let me know what you think about this one. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.